Imagine a storm on the horizon, a storm not of rain or thunder, but of horsemen. A storm so fast, so merciless, and so unstoppable that entire kingdoms crumbled before it. From the deserts of Central Asia to the gates of Europe, from the steppes of Mongolia to the shores of the Pacific, this storm carried with it fire, blood, and fear. This storm was the Mongols. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into one of the most dramatic and destructive chapters of world history, the Mongol invasions. Over the next hour and a half, we'll explore how nomadic horsemen from the grasslands of Mongolia rose to forge the largest contiguous empire in human history, reshaping civilizations, toppling dynasties, and leaving behind both devastation and innovation. But the Mongol invasions are more than just battles and bloodshed. They're a story about ambition, resilience, and human willpower. They're also about how societies respond when an unstoppable force crashes into the seemingly immovable walls of kingdoms and empires. So grab a drink, settle in, and let's journey back to the 13th century, when the Mongols thundered across the world.
Before we get to the invasions themselves, let's set the stage. The early 1200s were a time of fragmented power. In China, the once mighty Song dynasty had been pushed south by nomadic tribes, leaving northern China under the control of the Jin dynasty. In the Middle East, the Abbasid Caliphate still held symbolic authority, but real power rested with regional rulers like the Khwarezm Shah. In Eastern Europe, the Kievan Rus principalities squabbled with one another, while kingdoms like Poland and Hungary tried to hold their ground. In other words, the world was divided, borders were fragile, rivalries weakened empires, and into this fractured world, a leader emerged from the steppes of Mongolia, Temujin, the man we know today as Genghis Khan. The Mongols were nomadic herders, living off horses, sheep, and goats, moving with the seasons. To outsiders, they might have seemed primitive, but they had one extraordinary advantage: mobility. A Mongol horseman could ride over 100 miles in a single day, and their entire army could vanish into the grasslands, only to reappear on the other side of an empire weeks later. If settled civilizations were like castles, solid, slow, and defensive, the Mongols were like the wind, unpredictable, swift, and impossible to pin down. And under Genghis Khan, that wind would become a hurricane.
Temujin's rise is a story worthy of its own epic. Born into hardship, abandoned by allies, and nearly executed by rivals, he clawed his way up from obscurity. Through sheer charisma, ruthlessness, and vision, he united the warring Mongol tribes. By 1206, he had achieved what many thought impossible. He was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. But uniting the tribes was just the beginning. The Mongols' population was small compared to the vast empires around them. Genghis knew that survival depended on expansion. And so, the Mongol invasions began, not out of wanton destruction, but out of necessity and ambition. It started with campaigns against neighboring steppe tribes. But soon, Genghis Khan turned his gaze toward the great civilizations of the world. The Jin dynasty in northern China was the first true test. Unlike the steppe tribes, the Jin had fortified cities, massive walls, and armies equipped with heavy armor. But Genghis had more than speed. He had strategy. The Mongols adopted siege technology, learning from Chinese engineers they captured. They built trebuchets, battering rams, and siege towers. Imagine the shock of Chinese defenders watching horsemen from the steppe suddenly wielding weapons of advanced siege warfare. By 1215, the Mongols captured Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing.
Reports describe horrific scenes, mass slaughter, burning cities, and terror so profound that entire regions surrendered without resistance. This was the Mongols' psychological weapon, fear. Word spread that resistance meant annihilation. Entire cities opened their gates to avoid the fate of those who fought back. But the conquest of China was only the beginning.
In 1219, Genghis Khan made contact with the Khwarezm Empire, which controlled much of Persia and Central Asia. He offered trade, sending merchants and emissaries. But the Shah of Khwarezm, suspicious and arrogant, murdered the Mongol envoys. For Genghis, this was unforgivable. What followed was one of the most devastating campaigns in history. The Mongols swept across Central Asia like wildfire. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench fell. Chronicles described flames consuming entire skylines, rivers clogged with bodies, and fields littered with bones. The Mongols destroyed irrigation systems, crippling agriculture for generations. Entire populations were massacred. Some historians estimate that millions perished. To the Mongols, this was justice. To the world, it was apocalypse.
After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol conquests didn't stop. His successors, particularly his grandson Batu Khan, turned westward. In the late 1230s, Mongol armies swept into Russia, burning cities like Ryazan and Vladimir. By 1240, Kiev, once a jewel of Eastern Europe, was reduced to ashes. The Mongols didn't stop there. In 1241, they invaded Poland and Hungary. At the Battle of Liegnitz, European knights, proud, armored, and confident, charged the Mongols. But the Mongols feigned retreat, drawing them into chaos before unleashing a devastating counterattack. The knights were slaughtered. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, the same pattern repeated. The Mongols encircled the Hungarian army, trapping and annihilating them. Panic spread across Europe. Chroniclers wrote of horsemen who seemed like demons, unstoppable and merciless. But then, suddenly, the Mongols withdrew. Why? The death of the great Khan Ogedei required the princes to return to Mongolia to elect a new ruler. Europe had been spared, not by strength, but by chance.
While Europe caught its breath, the Middle East braced for disaster. In 1258, Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu, led the Mongols against Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate. Baghdad was a center of learning, culture, and trade. Its libraries housed centuries of knowledge. Its scholars advanced science, mathematics, and medicine. But the Mongols showed no mercy. After a brief siege, Baghdad fell. The caliph was executed, the city burned, and its libraries destroyed. Legend says the Tigris River ran black with ink from countless manuscripts thrown into the water, and red with the blood of its inhabitants. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The Mongols had struck at the very heart of Islamic civilization.
But even the Mongols had limits. When Hulagu advanced into the Levant, he encountered the Mamluks of Egypt, warriors who had themselves once been slaves. At the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, the Mamluks defeated the Mongols, marking the first major Mongol loss. In China, the Mongols eventually conquered the south, founding the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan. But ruling China proved far harder than conquering it. Resistance simmered, rebellions broke out, and eventually the Mongols were expelled. And in Japan, Mongol fleets met disaster. Twice, storms destroyed their invasion forces. Storms the Japanese called kamikaze, or divine wind. The empire that once seemed unstoppable had met the resilience of geography, climate, and determined resistance. So what was the legacy of the Mongol invasions? On one hand, devastation. Millions died. Cities were erased. Ancient irrigation systems, libraries, and cultural treasures were lost forever. The Mongols became a symbol of terror, remembered in Europe, the Middle East, and China as destroyers. And yet, the Mongol Empire also reshaped the world in ways we still feel today. They created the largest trade network in history. The Silk Road under Mongol protection connected East and West like never before. Ideas, technologies, and goods flowed across continents. Gunpowder, printing, paper, and even pasta found new homes. The Mongols also promoted religious tolerance, allowing Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others to coexist within their empire. In short, the Mongols destroyed worlds, but they also connected them. The story of the Mongol invasions is one of extremes, unmatched destruction, but also unprecedented connection. It asks us to reflect on the nature of power. What happens when mobility meets rigidity? When ambition collides with tradition? When a storm meets a fortress? The Mongols remind us that history is not just about kings and battles. It's about the clash of cultures, the fragility of civilizations, and the resilience of humanity. So the next time you hear the thunder of hoofs in a movie or see a story about Genghis Khan, remember, the Mongol invasions weren't just history, they were a turning point that reshaped the world.